Thanks to everybody who's joining us online. This is the first time we've promoted this as a DODD watch party. So if anybody online is watching together with a group of families, professionals, anybody like that, post some pictures in the comments. Let us know who you're watching with, those connections that you're making locally. To everybody in the room, thank you so much for coming. We think today's topic is really good, really timely, and what we've heard from families as very important topics around financial planning and Medicaid options. So we've got a jam-packed agenda, so we're going to try to move through it, keep on time. But please do ask questions, both online and here in the room. Please ask questions if you have any. I want to start today very quickly by having folks at your tables, and if you know everybody at your table, it's time to move. But take a moment to introduce yourself to everybody at your table. Name one thing that you're passionate about. Why are you here? Why did you come to Family Advisory Council today? What makes this important to you? And then offer folks the following information. Why you're attending, what you're hoping to learn today, what information are you going to gather, and how then are you going to disseminate that to other families? And then how will you apply the information? So we're going to, again, be learning a lot about financial planning, Medicaid options. How do you then take that information and apply it? So just take a few moments, and we'll give you about 7 to 10 minutes. Do that at your tables. We've got some small tables today, and get to know each other a little bit, okay? All right, take some time to do that. Thank you. share it with the bigger audience. Conversations are still going. Laura said that passionate about the future for the financial needs, financial planning for folks. It's great. So I just want to do a quick rundown of the agenda today, give you a snapshot of what today looks like. This morning is going to be a lot of information. So we're going to do financial options for families. We're going to do Medicaid and managed care service options. We're going to do DODD service options. And so that's going to be a jam-packed morning. You're going to get a lot of information, but like I said, feel free to ask tons of questions. We'll break for lunch at 12:30. And then this afternoon, we will take what we learned this morning and have table conversations around that. So around what helps, what gets in the way of families understanding all this information we're going to give you this morning. And then this afternoon, Director Davis is planning on joining us, and we will report out what we think about those things directly to him. And then we'll end the day with some Charting the Life Course tools and framework that you can take with you to better use these principles around financial planning. So a quick reminder, the purpose of the FAC core group, who helps me plan all of this. So it's a dozen family members who actually do all the work. I just kind of stand up here and rah-rah. But they're here to strengthen the leadership and ownership of FAC. So that's really what we want. We want family involvement on all levels, all the way from planning this to implementation. And so you can see the folks here. We have a few folks in the room. If you could stand up so folks know who you are. I know you all love this. And so this afternoon, they're going to be helping out facilitate these table conversations with everybody. So I appreciate everybody standing up. I know we've got a couple online as well that are going to help kind of facilitate conversations online. I appreciate everybody that's doing that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to one of our FAC core group members, Barb, and she's going to list some kind of ground rules for the day.
Welcome, everyone. Just for those, I think there's some new faces I haven't seen here before, but the restrooms are out the door and down the hall. And we also have some recycling bins in the hallway. We are streaming on Facebook Live, so just kind of remember that. We also are here for our families. We really appreciate, we have professionals involved, but the main focus here is our families. So if you have some professional concerns, you have other forums you can direct that to. So just respect for what our families' needs are. When you're asking questions throughout the day, please raise your hand and wait for somebody with a microphone to come along so that we can make sure everyone on Facebook Live can hear it as well. That's about it. It's a very short list of rules. We have, for our day, it's for financial options for families, and we have two very wonderful gentlemen here that I've heard speak before, so I think I appreciate it. Nicholas Hancart is from the Public Affairs Office for the Stable Account. And Logan Phillips, he's an attorney that's going to talk to us about some of the special trusts and all of the concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Barb. Thank you. Nick's going to talk first. And if I take any second over 2.5 minutes, Logan will just begin talking, and you can hear both of us talk at the same time. Wonderful. So, I'm going to sit in front and heckle you. Perfect. Well, good morning to all of you. First off, thank you all for being here. I greatly appreciate it. being a part of stable accounts, and we have seen over $70 million in the last 2.5 years been able to have been saved. And we hit over 10,000 enrollments, and that's amazing to see that 10,000 families across the country have been able to now utilize stable accounts to help save for their loved ones. But since we have only been around for 2.5 years, that means we are by far one of the last players on it can add up to the $15,000. And once that January 1st hits, everybody gets a clean slate, and they can build upon what they put into the account in previous years. So the assets can continue to grow and grow and grow, and that's also where we get our lifetime limit, which is $468,000. Right? I hope everybody gets that. I hope that everybody has to worry about that. Now, the second number that I did want to focus on is $27,140. What this is another annual account for people, but this is for individuals that are also employed, because this allows for people to be able to take some of the wages that they're earning and put it away. So we're bridging that gap between the $15,000 and the $27,000, and individuals are able to do so using their wages. Are there any questions on the contribution limits with the account? Yes.
For the employed, is there any requirements on the type of employment or length of employment or?
That's a great question. There are no requirements on employment as long as somebody is receiving a paycheck. So there's no part-time, full-time, hourly requirements. There's no that you can only be working in a certain field or a certain position. As long as somebody's just receiving an income, that allows for them to be able to contribute that much more into their account.
Okay, thank you.
Spending the funds, this is also, besides eligibility, is one of the biggest questions that I get. And when we talk about spending the funds, the money in the account needs to be spent on a qualified, oh, did I miss one? Oh, my apologies. Yes, you should have just started yelling. Yell at me next time.
I was wondering if someone is going to get a large back payment from Social Security. This happened once before, and we were told we had to spend it down within 6 months so that he would not lose his benefits and his waiver. Is this a way? Can we open an account and put that check in there? Would it protect his benefits?
I'm going to give you two different answers, and it's completely based on the amount of money that back payment might be. Because the first thing I want to do is figure out how much money that might be, just because if it's over that $15,000, then we're going to want to talk to Logan about that. But it also depends upon what time of year. And I only say that because I was actually in Tuscarawas County last year in November, and there was a 22-year-old gentleman. He received $27,000 back payment from Social Security. That's a ton of money. And he did. He had, except it was only 90 days to spend it, which is a lot less time. And so what happened with him was we opened up a stable account, put $15,000 in it, and then once we hit into January 1st, remember everybody gets that clean slate to work with, so he was able to put the rest in. Now, for a lot of people, that time of the year just might not work at all. And so that's definitely where we would want to bring in Logan and his firm to make sure that all that money is protected, because if it doesn't work out, that we just want to make sure that that annual contribution limit is being followed, because people wouldn't be able to put in more than $15,000 from that back payment. So if it's more than that, then we would want to other options on how they can work together with a stable account.
But it would protect that.
Yes.
Let's say it's 10,000. That would be a way to protect it.
Oh yes, of course, yes.
Nick, I want to go back to one slide if you could, and make sure that I didn't hear this wrong, or just to make sure that I think I understand it right. That 27,140. That's not, if I work 2 hours a week, I can contribute. Other people can contribute up to 27,140. Those have to be my wages. The difference between the 15,000 and the 27,140 are my wages as a disabled individual.
Yes, you are exactly correct. So the full 27,000 can technically be somebody's wages, as long as the only thing that would cap that is if their wages were under the 12,140, and then let's say somebody makes $5,000 a year instead of the 12,140, that 5 would be their new cap. So whatever their wage is would be added on to the 15 up to the 27,000. Yes, sir.
You mentioned several times about the money will be protected. Protected from what?
Well, when we talk about the money in the account being protected, I usually mean that it is protected from resource limits, because when it comes to SSI and Medicaid, that an individual has a resource limit or asset limit they need to adhere to at the end of every month. And so this money is a resource shield, so that the money in the account is not looked at as a resource. Because every month, let's say somebody's receiving SSI, that every month Social Security intakes how much money they have in all of their different financial accounts. And they'll see how much they have in a stable account, but they'll know that that's how much cannot be counted against that $2,000 limit that they have per month. So one thing that this also avoids is, even if people are just putting a little bit of money away at a time, that it avoids what is typically called, or typically known as, a monthly spend out at the end of every month. When we're talking about expenses and a qualified disability expense, or a QDE, the money in a single account needs to be spent on what's called, or anything that relates to the individual and their disability and helps to maintain or improve health, independence, or quality of life. That's really broad, but that's great. And the reason why it's great is because this is not a cookie cutter type of account. It's because an individual's needs will change over their lifetime, and this account can fit their needs. But also, not every individual has the same types of needs. And so whatever an individual's needs might be, whether it's horseback riding may be therapeutic, or aquatics may be therapeutic to an individual, that this can fit whatever their needs might be, and it allows them to still be able to spend on the things that they want to. Because we also look at things like housing and rent, basic living expenses. People can take their stable card, which I'm going to touch on in just a little bit, and go to the grocery store as well. Transportation, education, that's also why I brought up the 529 plans earlier. But it's also, when we look at these broad categories, it's not just, when we look at broad categories like transportation, it's not just, oh, well, I have a car payment. It's, well, the driver needs insurance to drive, the car needs gas, or car needs an update, anything like that. But also, maybe the individual doesn't have the opportunity to drive, and they may need to take ride-sharing services, Uber, Lyft, any community provided service that they can take advantage of. The stable card, what the stable card is it is a loadable debit card. And it's a Visa card, so it's accepted anywhere Visa is. And what I mean by loadable is that when somebody receives this money, or receives the card, that they will take funds from their stable account and load it onto the card. So when they first get the card, it has $0 on it, and that's because it needs to be loaded from the account. But that's also a security protection, in the sense that we know that a lot of families plan on using this to build assets up at whatever time they need. And at this point, let's say the account has $1,000 in it. Maybe they don't want that beneficiary to be able to have $1,000 to be able to spend wherever they may be going out in the community. That they can limit that to however much they want. Maybe it's $50, $100, whatever they see fit, that amount, or that the card can have on it. So it doesn't have to be the full amount that's in the account that would be on the card. It's however much somebody wants to load onto it. A couple of protections that we have as well is also that there's no overdraft. So because it is a debit card, it doesn't spend what it doesn't have. There's also no cash access with the card, so it cannot be used at ATMs, or if somebody's at the grocery store and they're getting groceries and it asks for cash back, it will not allow them to do so. We track expenses for the lifetime of the account for every dollar that comes in and every dollar that goes out. But at the same point in time, people now have the opportunity to take a picture of their receipt and attach it to a certain line item. So let's say that somebody went to Kroger and it says, today's date, somebody went to Kroger and they spent $50. But if they wanted to, they have the opportunity to take a picture of their receipt and attach it to that one line item, And also, we will hold on to that receipt for the lifetime of the account as well. We hold on to those pictures as well. And I believe that I might have given you that extra 30 seconds, Logan. This is Logan's wheelhouse. Oh, yes, Tom.
Just one question. So I noticed, I was looking through my son's account information.
Yes.
I noticed back in October that 12,140, that's additional for employed folks, was actually 12,060 back in
Yes.
October. Is that expected to rise?
So that
over
will
time?
rise every year. I appreciate that question. That extra amount for the able to work component follows the federal poverty line for a single income household, but it's for the previous year. So for 2019, it's 2018's number, and when it was first rolled out in 2018, it used 2017's number. So when we look to 2020, it'll be using 2019's number.
I do have a question from Facebook. Do the funds remaining in the account get paid back to the government after death?
No. Well, there is a lot of things that can happen, and I do not have enough time to be able to, but I will answer it on Facebook Live. I'll come back and comment on that. There's a lot of processes that go into, depends upon what an individual may or may not be receiving, or if an individual has a will or not, what their estate plan might look like. And so I'll get into all of that nitty gritty, and I can after as well, but I do not have enough time to answer that right now.
Okay, great. I mean, I think the short answer is there is a state payback under certain circumstances. Is that correct?
Yes, but with a lot of protections that we've tried to put on it.
Great. And just to give Nick, this presentation and other presentations are available on the Stable Account website, and lots of answers are there. And the 1-800 number on their website is actually answered by a human being. It's fabulous, 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 fabulous. So, my name is Logan Phillips. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Resch, Ruth, Phillips, and Graham. And most of my work on a daily basis is working with individuals and families to plan for the death of a loved one. Generally, it's the parents. And making sure that an individual with special needs can maintain government benefits, those benefits being Medicaid and SSI. In order to qualify for SSI, an individual, do I have a marker?
There's some on the tables in front of
Great. Oh, it doesn't smell like chocolate, it's just brown. Okay. So, in order to qualify for SSI, an individual may not have more than $2,000 in countable resources. Okay? That is the same asset limit for a person for Medicaid waivers. Okay? For Medicaid waivers, it's the same asset limit. There is a higher resource or asset limit for individuals who are part of the Medicaid buy-in for workers with disabilities. The latest number I saw was 12,175. That was on Disability Ohio's Rights website. But anyway, it's not a lot of money. And most people, when they pass away, intend to leave more money than $12,000 for their child, loved one with a disability. So people come to see me, and they come to see my law partner, Derek Graham, who's in the back, to plan for the eventuality of their death. Okay? And they walk in the room and they say, we need a special needs trust. And generally, we talk about why. And what we come to find out is what they want is a place to put money for the care of their loved one that will replace their pocket. Okay? So generally speaking, when parents or grandma or brother and sister have been helping a person with a disability, they have been paying for the things that Medicaid and Social Security don't pay for out of their own pocket. The trip to Disney, the equine therapy, the tickets to the Clippers, the things that make life worth living, quality of life stuff. And so what we end up doing is saying, how about we establish a treasure chest for that individual where you can leave your money that can be spent for your loved one. That's the beneficiary. And we're going to give the keys to that treasure chest to someone that you trust, or someone that you know, or someone that loves the beneficiary. Okay? Now, sometimes that's a family member, sometimes that's a bank. It all kind of depends. And then when I tell people, I say, and here's the best part. We call this a trust. And when you pass away, your money comes into this treasure chest or trust. And when your loved one passes away who has the disability, that money can go to where you want it to go, not to the state of Ohio. Make sense? That is not a special needs trust. Okay? That is a discretionary trust. We call them third-party established trusts. Now, why I say that's not a special needs trust is because when the state of Ohio hears special needs trust, this is what they think happens. When that beneficiary dies, there is a payback provision. Okay? Now, folks who don't work for the state of Ohio in Medicaid and don't work for Social Security call both of these special needs trusts, because folks who aren't parents and loved ones say, a special needs trust is just what I call anything that protects my kids' benefits, where I can leave money. But I think it's important that everyone be aware that under the Ohio Revised Code, this is a special needs trust, payback provision. This is a discretionary trust, no payback provision. I'll ask people who have relatives that they're planning to leave money for, which one do you want? Okay? Discretionary, right. Now, here's the difference. If the money that you are intending to leave for the care of your loved one goes directly to a trust, this will work. If the money that you are intending to leave for a loved one goes to that loved one first, then we have to put it in a special needs trust. That causes a lot of stress for the individual with disabilities and their typical sibling or their aunt or their uncle who's going to be doing this. Okay? So, what we do is we work with families to set this up so that perhaps that life insurance where you want, let's just say, Mark, okay? If you want Mark, who has a disability, to receive the $1 million life insurance policy to make sure that his swing works and that he gets to go to Cincinnati Bengals games every year, okay? What you would want to do is put Mark's name down on that insurance policy, except you can't, because guess what? That insurance policy is more than $2,000. So what we would do is we work with families to add this trust as the beneficiary of that life insurance policy. Does that make sense? Okay, so now that we have an understanding of what the difference is, a discretionary trust that we call third-party established discretionary trust, and a special needs trust, let's talk about the stable account, okay? And I want to give you an example from my practice. 4, 5, 6 years ago, I worked with a family, and we're going to say that their son's name is Joe. And Joe works. And Joe was receiving SSI and a Medicaid waiver. Joe works at a local grocery store, and he works all year round putting carts away. And it's cold during many of those months. And he loved making money. And he was an individual who could travel on his own. So during the summer, he spent his money that he earned. He would go on trips to war memorials, get on a bus, stay in a hotel. He was capable of doing that. Fabulous, okay? And so he spent that money. So his bank account never got really high because he got the money and he spent it. He got the money and spent it. Kind of like what I do with my money. I get it and I spend it, okay? That's why my wife is in charge of our finances. Okay, so all of that was great, except in the winter, nobody goes to Gettysburg in the winter because it's cold, okay? So he would save his money. Well, what happens when he got close to $2,000 or that $12,000 mark? Okay? He was going to get close to losing his assets or his benefits. So his parents were going out and they were spending money at Target and Walmart. And they said, Logan, we can only buy so many Legos. Okay? They were taking money that he earned in the snow and wasting it, is what they thought and what Joe thought. So here's what we did. We established, because whose money was it? It was Joe's money, right? So we established a special needs trust for Joe to put his money in when it got close to $2,000 in his bank account. Guess who had the keys to that treasure chest? Joe did not have the keys. He's not allowed to. His mom and dad. Now, if I don't know, if I know a lot of things, okay? There's 2 words. They start with BS, okay? Joe is, it's bogus stuff. I don't know what you guys were thinking, okay? Let's think about this for a second. Joe is working. He is moving carts in the snow, freezing his fingers off. And he has to take his money and give it to the control of his parents. And he's capable of doing some things with his money that his parents don't need to control. That's bogus stuff. Okay? So, that's what we had to do. The stable account comes along. Here's what we can do now. Instead of putting money into a special needs trust that his mom and dad control, we can put that money in the stable account. Guess who controls the stable account? Joe does. Think about that difference. What does that do for Joe? First of all, we're not doing Legos, okay? And he is in control of the money that he earns, okay? Independence. Self-esteem, okay? All of that is really powerful that the stable account allows for. So in my practice, we've been using the stable account to foster independence, although I had a mom in my office the other day and she talked about interdependence, and I thought that was great. I mean, who here is really independent? You ask my wife, there is no way I'm independent, okay? I'm interdependent, okay? We all are. We're interdependent. And so this fosters interdependence in a new way, and I really like it, okay? So that's just one example of how the stable account can be used. Make sense? Okay, now, let's talk about how after a parent is gone, okay? So, this discretionary trust that we all decided is what we want to have. Can you believe I taught 6th grade with this handwriting? Is that awful? Okay, so discretionary trust. If we leave that $1 million life insurance policy to a discretionary trust, okay, guess who can't have the keys to that discretionary trust? Joe can't have the keys to that discretionary trust. But you know what that discretionary trust can do? That discretionary trust can put money into a stable account. Who controls a stable account? Joe does. How powerful is that? Okay? Let me talk to you a little bit more about what we like about, or what I like personally about a stable account. Okay? One of the number 1 fears that clients have when they come in my office and talking about their loved one with disabilities is money and cash, and understanding cash and how stressful that can be. What they would love to do is to be able to foster independence for their child, except they're concerned about him being taken advantage of. So they'd love to send him down to the GameStop to buy the new video game, but they don't want to give him their credit card because they're concerned that he might be taken advantage of and buy a game for everybody that he meets. Okay? They don't want to give him cash because cash means you have to get change, okay? And change can be stressful, okay? What does the stable account allow you to do? What Nick just talked about. Load a debit card with the amount of money. So if the game's going to be $50, you put $50 on it. You don't have to worry about the overcharges. Here's the other thing, I love it. When was the last time you used cash? Okay? So, what does the stable account debit card make a person with disabilities feel? Just like everybody else. I was in talking about just how technology has helped. I love that. Okay? What about the new Siri or Alexa, turn on my lights? Okay? All of that kind of technology to foster and have us all be more alike. Tim Tebow does that night out, and kids are going to homecoming. Okay? You go to homecoming dinner, and you happen to have a disability, and your parents don't give you their credit card; they give you cash. You're the only person paying cash because everybody else has got a credit card. The stable debit card allows for that kind of independence that makes people more the same, and I think that's really powerful in the disability community. Okay? Questions so far? Okay? Yeah.
Question from Facebook. Is a discretionary trust the same as an irrevocable trust?
They are not the same. Okay? So a discretionary trust may be an irrevocable trust. And an irrevocable trust may be a discretionary trust, but they are not absolutely one and the same. So I personally, when I create a discretionary trust, I generally make it an irrevocable trust. And what that means is that when somebody puts money in that trust, the only person it can be spent on is the beneficiary. Mom and dad can't take it out to buy themselves a cup of coffee later. Okay? But the answer is not necessarily. Any questions? How long do I have to go? Do I have till 11? Great. Awesome. Questions? Okay. So let's talk a little bit about just trusts in general. Okay? So everybody out there that nodded their head in Facebook world or here in the office who said, while you're alive, you are the treasure chest for the individual who you love and care about. Okay? Who makes the decisions about what's going to be purchased for that individual? You do, right? Okay? I've made a decision that it's important that he go to the Clippers games this year. I've made a decision that one of the ideas about establishing a discretionary trust before you pass away is when you leave money to this trust and you put sister as the trustee, or Bank One as the trustee, or Johnson Trust Company, or Park National Bank as the trustee, okay? They need to know how to spend that money, okay? Now, in order for this not to qualify as an asset, because remember, that's why we're leaving the money in the trust, so it doesn't qualify as a resource or an asset. So let's be really, really generous here. Let's say that we've got $1 million life insurance policy, or $500,000. Okay? So $500,000 goes into that. And you're going to put somebody else in charge of that money. My guess is you have strong feelings about where you think that money should be spent, or how you think that money should be spent. So by planning ahead, you can leave a roadmap for this money. Okay? A roadmap for care and support of this beneficiary. Okay? When I was living at home with my stepbrother, when my dad and stepmom would go out for a date night, it was 3 pages of instructions for how my stepbrother, what kind of assistance he could use. He suffered from a seizure disorder. Okay? So this is what you do. I bet some of you out there have that right now. The instruction list. Here's a question. What are your instructions for how you want life to go after you're gone? All of that money that you're leaving, what instructions have you left? If the answer is none, think about at least putting down something, okay? Or what we talk about a lot is, what are the things that have to be known right away? Okay? What are the essential items? The kind of, look here, she's allergic to bees. Here's her EpiPen. Okay? All of that information goes in this roadmap, along with the information like we'd like her to go to the beach every year. Okay? We want you to spend money to have her sister go with her to the beach. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay? So this roadmap is really powerful. Okay? Now, can we talk about, question, yeah?
Is the roadmap the same as the letter of intent?
It oftentimes is. It's a different name for it. Yes. Other questions? Okay, can we talk about something that I like to call money laundering? All right. Legal money laundering. All right. I will ask Facebook and people here. Anybody here have a loved one or themselves on SSI? You can just nod your heads at your computer or wherever. Okay, SSI. We know what happens when people provide individuals who are on SSI with support, right? Their payment goes down. Okay? So the maximum payment for SSI is $771 a month. If somebody provides you, let's say, rent-free housing for a month, what happens to your next month's payment? Okay? It's reduced by 1/3. So, let's consider this. SSI is supposed to pay for housing. Okay? $771 probably doesn't get you into an apartment living by yourself in a neighborhood that you want to live in or that you would want your loved one with a disability to live in, right? And sometimes individuals need to live by themselves, okay? I have certainly needed to do that throughout my life. I was unmanageable for a period of time. Okay, so let's suppose that mom and dad say, you know what, we're going to go ahead and pay rent of $1,500 a month. But we're not going to give it to you because we know what happens to your SSI. If we give you $1,500 a month, daughter, you are going to lose all of your SSI because of the dollar for dollar reduction. So we're not going to do that. We're instead just going to pay the landlord. So, what happens? The $771 is reduced by 1/3. So they pay the landlord in, it's March. They pay the landlord in March. Okay? They have to report that to SSI. What happens in April? The payment's only $514. Okay? And every time they pay the $1,500 to the landlord, $514. Okay? Well, you can do the math. You take the difference and multiply it by 12. That's a lot of money. Okay? Upwards of $3,000 that you're leaving on the table. So, if instead mom and dad put the $1,500 in the stable account and then pay the landlord out of the stable account, guess what? No reduction. So I like to think of the treasurer's office washing that money. Okay? They don't like it when they usually get red in the face. There he is, Nick's gonna red in the face, okay? So they're washing that money, we're cleaning it. But think about that for a second. That's upwards of more than $3,000. Okay? So I encourage you to look into all of the abilities that the stable account provides. Because once an asset and cash is in the stable account, it is not countable for SSI. So you want to give your child $1,000 cash. You can't do it. Okay? Unless you want SSI to go to 0 the next month. Instead, put it in the stable account, load up the debit card, and guess what? We do not have any reduction in SSI. That's just one of the powerful things that the stable account allows you to do. And when you're gone, your discretionary trust can do the exact same thing. And we think that's really powerful. So thank you, Steve, for inviting me to talk. Thank you, Nick, for all that the state's doing. Okay? And Carolyn's going to talk. Great.
Well, I'm going to talk about you.
Okay.
We had you at council. It's been some time ago, but we were so impressed with your presentation. We asked you to work up a new benefits planning book for us. This just came. This is the proof. Just came in yesterday. I have to give it back. And of course, it's state printing, so you know it's going to take a month to get it printed. But hey, so we will have this for you. Logan did it. Logan and his staff did it, and it's really clear. And you know, because he knows how to talk to families. So we will have this for you, and as soon as I get it, you know, Steve and everybody will get it so we can get it to you. Yes, it will be, absolutely, yes. And if you need copies for your groups and whatever, that's fine, that's what it's for.
Thank you, Carolyn, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody, have a great day.
Thanks, Logan. Nick, thank you as well for your time and for answering those questions. Next, we have Loretta. She's going to introduce our next set of speakers around Medicaid and managed care service options.
Okay, we would like to welcome Autumn Darnell and Kelsey Heigl from the Ohio Department of Medicaid.
We're just going to get up here one at a time, I think. Hi, I'm Kelsey Heigl. I don't know if you can hear it. It's pretty close to my mouth, so hopefully you can. We're going to kind of tag team this presentation. Autumn and I both work at the Department of Medicaid in the managed care office. Oh, yeah.
Yes,
I do. Hi, you need that. We both work in the managed care office. I focus mostly on managed care policy with our plans, and Autumn focuses more on hospitals and home health services. So she's going to talk more to some specific services, but I am going to just kind of run through the beginning part of the presentation. So a quick Medicaid 101 and managed care 101, and then like I said, Autumn is going to dive more actually into the services that can be provided. So really quick, Medicaid is, we have approximately 130,000 providers, making Medicaid Ohio's largest healthcare provider, and we deliver care to nearly 3 million individuals across the state, which is kind of amazing when you think about it. It's quite big. Really quick, the covered populations through Medicaid, who qualifies for coverage. So eligibility for Medicaid is based on a category, but also your income, which was talked about in the last presentation. So income eligibility is determined using that modified adjusted gross income, commonly referred to as MAGI, and then it's also based upon your household size. So there are differences if you're one person versus a family of four. All of that information can also be found online. And then to be eligible for federal funding, Ohio Medicaid is required to provide coverage within certain category groups. And then we can also choose to extend coverage to additional categories as well. So we often group these into 4 pretty broad categories. So we've got our covered families and children, so that includes your parents, children, and then also pregnant women. We've got the age-blind and disabled population, and then we also have Medicaid expansion, or the Group 8 population, so that was just recently added in the last few years. So then, this is a really quick overview of some of the, oh no. How far did I go? Did I go all the way to the beginning? Wait, do I go back? Man. Holy crap. Sorry. Oh my lord. Okay, wait. I'm back on mine. Holy smokes. Oh my goodness. Okay, this is where I was. Sorry about that. I won't touch this anymore. I'll leave it up here and just touch it when I need it. Okay, so there are services that Medicaid is required to cover from based on federal regulations. So some of these are listed here. They are not all listed here. We just kind of highlighted some of the more important ones. We wanted to bring attention to EPSDT, which is the early periodic screening, diagnosis, testing? Diagnostic and treatment, sorry. I should have wrote out the full thing on there. We'll talk about that really briefly today, home health services, nursing facility services, and Autumn's going to cover some of those a little later. So those are the ones we're required to cover, and then Ohio also covers some additional services that are not mandated by the federal government. So things such as prescription drugs, durable medical equipment. Again, this list isn't all-encompassing. All of the covered services can be found on our website, but we will talk about private duty nursing. And then waiver services we'll touch on, and then I know there's a whole presentation after ours about waiver services. And then also care and ICF IIDs are also an optional service that the state of Ohio chooses to cover. So that was, I mentioned EPSDT before. We'll talk about this a little later in the presentation as well. But in Ohio, we call EPSDT Health Check. So if you've heard of Health Check, that's Ohio's version of EPSDT. Kind of how they mentioned at the federal level, there's able accounts, then Ohio calls it a stable account. We can't ever call things what the federal government calls them. We must be more difficult. So in Ohio, we refer to EPSDT as Health Check. It's for children under the age of 21 enrolled in Medicaid, and they are entitled to certain benefits. They have to be covered for children, even if they're not covered for adults. And also, some of these services aren't covered in our typical Medicaid state plan, so there are additional benefits that children can receive through the program. And then one other thing I wanted to cover really quickly, but I know Amy will be here to talk about them, is our developmental disability waivers. These waiver services just allow individuals to receive care in their homes and communities rather than an institutional setting. So they offer an alternative to a placement in an ICF IID or potentially a nursing facility. So they're administered by the Department of Developmental Disabilities. They're for all ages, and so the three waivers that we have are individual options, level 1, and self waivers. When we talk about waiver services broadly for Medicaid, an individual must have an institutional level of care, meaning that they would require care in an institutional setting if a waiver service wasn't available. On the DD side, the individual has to meet a DD level of care, so they don't meet the traditional Medicaid level of care. But I am sure Amy will talk more about that in her presentation. And there's a lot more information on the DD website regarding those waivers as well. Too many things now. I'm like trying to focus on this clicker. So I'm going to really briefly touch upon managed care. So that was just kind of traditional Medicaid that we covered there. I have a little more familiarity with the managed care side of it. So in a traditional fee-for-service model, if an individual goes to the doctor, that doctor just goes ahead and bills Medicaid for that service that was provided, and then we pay that claim. But we've shifted from more of a fee-for-service model to more of a managed care model for most of our eligibility categories. And so that's what Ohio typically works as now. Under this type of model, the state, and when I say state, we mean the managed care plans as our designated entity, they pay the healthcare claims, and we pay them a monthly amount for all of their members. So plans get a member per month capitation rate for all of the members that they have that are enrolled in Ohio Medicaid. We pay them that set amount. And then the managed care plans cover any cost for that member. So if the member ends up needing more services, the plans are on the hook for those costs. Conversely, if the member has a month where they don't need a lot of services, the plans keep any portion of the payment that is given to them for that month. So it's just kind of a cost benefit for the plans. We have 6 plans throughout the state of Ohio. But we only have 5 plans per line of business. So we have traditional managed care plans. Those are Buckeye, United, Molina, CareSource, and Paramount. Those cover your traditional managed care members. And then we also have MyCare Ohio, which is for individuals who need more long-term care services. And those are Buckeye, United, Molina, CareSource, and Aetna, which is a little confusing. But this kind of lays it out nicely. All of our plans have a contract administrator who ensure they're in compliance with all of our state rules and federal laws. And then those people are all in charge of oversight. We have contracts with each of those plans. However, the contracts are the same per line of business. So Buckeye's Medicaid managed care contract is the same as Paramount's Medicaid managed care contract. They all have the same requirements that the state puts on them. There's no difference there. And then our MyCare plans have a separate contract for that line of business. But again, all of those plans have the same contract with the state as well. So like I mentioned, the state of Ohio has shifted pretty broadly to more of a managed care focus. 90% of our Medicaid population is covered by a managed care plan. Only about 10% of people are still covered under fee-for-service, and that's a lot of our individuals with long-term care needs. So the people who are required to be enrolled in managed care are children and families, that adult extension category that I mentioned before, ABD adults and their children, or ABD children, not their children, children in custody, children receiving services through the BCMH program that the Department of Health runs, and then the breast and cervical cancer project enrollees. We did want to point out individuals on the DD waiver have the option to enroll in managed care. They are the only waiver individuals who have the option right now to enroll in managed care. All of our other waiver individuals are carved out of managed care and continue on traditional fee-for-service. So then I mentioned the people that have to enroll in managed care. We do have people who then are not required to enroll in managed care. So that's just listed here. Like I mentioned, individuals receiving those long-term care benefits, so waiver services or individuals in a nursing facility, individuals who are incarcerated, but we do have a pre-release program. So some individuals do get pre-release and are enrolled into a managed care plan. And then individuals who are duly eligible for both Medicaid and managed care, but are not living in one of our demonstration counties for the MyCare program, those people are not enrolled in managed care, so they're kept in fee-for-service. We do have a quick slide about those individuals who are enrolled on a DP waiver, like I mentioned before. So any individual enrolled on one of the 3 waivers that the Department of Developmental Disabilities administers can enroll in managed care, again, on a voluntary basis. Individuals who are enrolled on managed care when they become eligible for the waiver will stay in managed care unless they decide that they want to disenroll. And so this just has a little bit more information. They can disenroll from managed care at any time, and there are currently about 3,000 individuals that we have that are enrolled in managed care and receiving services from a DD waiver. So a few slides ago, I talked about the services that Ohio Medicaid covers, both those federally mandated and the value-added or the additional options that we provide as the state. So the managed care plans are required to cover all the services that Ohio Medicaid has elected to cover. So both those federally mandated services and the additional services that we cover as a state. Plans have to cover those services, but then plans can also provide additional services above Medicaid services for their members. And so some of those are listed up here. So there's a lot of care management that the plans offer to individuals that is not offered on the fee-for-service. There is 24-hour nurse lines. There's a lot of transportation available through, or additional transportation available through managed care plans. Extended office hours. There's a lot of participation incentives. So even for us at the state, through our healthcare, we have all these quit smoking incentives. So the plans can offer those to our Medicaid beneficiaries as well. And then the last slide that I'm going to cover is they all have the handout, I believe. So you'll have this handy for you if you have questions about certain plans. So just kind of the Medicaid hotline, how to research, how to reach that, and then each plan also has a customer service member line. So if you have any questions for plans specifically, that information is there for you. Any questions before I turn it over to Autumn? Yeah.
Hi, Kelsey, thanks.
Yeah.
I'm looking at two different slides here. The population served by managed care. The
Mhm.
very last item says individuals on a DD waiver have the option to enroll.
Mhm.
But then on the very next slide, it says populations not enrolled in managed care. And the second bullet there says in parentheses waiver services.
Right, so the Department of Medicaid has several different waivers. So we've got the DD waivers, but we also have one waiver that's administered by the Department of Medicaid, as well as 2 or 3 waiver services for programs that are administered through the Department of Aging. So Medicaid waivers and aging waivers, those individuals are carved out of managed care, and they do not have the option to enroll in a managed care plan. So the slide probably could be tweaked a little bit to clarify again, but then our DD waiver members do have the option to enroll in managed care if they choose to.
I think it's actually in the letter and in the promotion, I think it's actually stated that way in the information that's sent out when you go to enroll. It's very confusing.
Yeah.
We get
Okay,
lots
I
of
can
calls.
definitely, I can bring that back. I know we were just talking about how many letters Medicaid sends out, so we can bring that back and try to address it. It's confusing when you've got voluntary and not enrolled. And any other questions?
Hi, I'm Autumn Darnell, and I also wanted to share, Shauna Trimble is with us today as well. She's going to be coming up after me to talk about the health check that Kelsey mentioned a minute ago. We didn't mean to leave her off because she is our guru for health check. We can't do this without her. So I'm just going to talk a little bit more into detail about the Ohio home care program through the traditional Medicaid. So I want to be very clear, this is just for the traditional Medicaid folks that aren't getting services through the managed care plans, or this, you know, you may have a waiver, but this would still be like your traditional Medicaid card. Our home care program actually consists of like home health services and private duty nursing. The home health services are your home health nursing, home health aid, and your skilled therapy. And then private duty nursing is treated a little bit differently because the home health services are meant to be like short-term and intermittent, and then private duty nursing is more long-term. And the one thing about traditional Medicaid, the home health home care program, is it does not include case management services, which a lot of times that comes with your waiver or with your managed care plans. The Ohio Administrative Code rules around our home care program are 5160-12, and it's more about the regulations and the providers and how they provide the services. So for the traditional like home health services, the general requirements are it must be medically necessary. The individual must participate in a face-to-face encounter with the treating physician who's ordering the services. They must also participate in the development of their plan of care with the treating physician and the home health agency that's providing the care. And home health services must be provided by a Medicare certified home health agency that's enrolled with Ohio Medicaid. The standard hours that the benefit allows for is 8 hours a day, and that can be a combination of combined home health nursing, aid, and therapy. They're allowed up to 14 hours a week of combined nursing and aid, and the visits are limited to 4 hours or less for any of those services. And I just have a little note here that each of the managed care plans might have a little bit, they might be able to tweak that a little bit, but they would have a different like authorization and assessment guidelines when they're doing this, but they would need to provide at least that same benefit. So post-hospitalization, if you've had a 3-day inpatient hospital stay, the hours are increased for the weekly amount. You're still allowed 8 hours a day of the combined 3, but you are now allowed to have 28 hours a day. 28 hours a week for the combined nursing and aid. It's increased a little bit. The visits are still limited to the 4 hours, and they still have to be provided by the Medicare certified home health agency that's enrolled with Ohio Medicaid. And again, the managed care plans may have a different authorization or assessment for these services. The other thing I would just like to note here is if more hours are needed other than the standard benefit, they are available through like an assessment and a prior authorization process. It's just depending on what's required. But the home health agencies would work with the treating physician and the individual to try to get that approved to get those additional services if needed. So I was just going to go into a little bit about what the nursing actually provides if you're receiving home health nursing. It's a service that requires the skills and is performed either by a registered nurse or a licensed practice nurse. And some of the tasks, I won't read through all of them just because you guys have the slides in front of you, but it's like IV insertion, removal or discontinuation, or IV medication administration, central line dressing changes. And I just wanted to stress there again, it's less than 4 hours just because I think sometimes the home health nursing and the private duty nursing gets a little confused. So this is strictly like the home health nursing that's less than 4 hours. So as far as the home health aide, the aide cannot be a parent, a step-parent, foster parent, or a legal guardian of an individual who is under 18 years of age or the individual's spouse. And some of the tasks that they include are like bathing and dressing, grooming, feeding, just performing like routine care of prosthetics or orthopedic devices. Like I said, there's quite a few things that are here. They may include incidental services as long as they do not substantially extend the time of the visit. And again, the visits are limited to 4 hours. So the next slide is about the skilled therapy, which includes physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech-language pathology services. They do require the skills and are performed by a skilled therapist, and those are usually employed by or work through the home health agency again. They must be reasonable in the amount and frequency and duration. They may include treatments and assessments or therapeutic exercises, but cannot include activities that are for the general welfare of the individual, including motivational or general activities for the overall fitness of the individual. And then just some of the service limits is that home health nursing and aid cannot be for rehabilitative care or respite care under the state plan or traditional Medicaid. And skilled therapy also includes maintenance care. Is there any questions around that before I move into private duty nursing?
The therapy services and some of the services provided, would that mean that you were not able to leave the home to receive them in home health? I mean, obviously you can go outside to get therapies and some of the other services.
No, you can have them provide. This is just what Medicaid would pay for in the home.
Okay.
I mean, therapies are also, skilled therapies are a Medicaid benefit, so these are just the services that would be provided under the home health benefit.
Under that. Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, so private duty nursing is just a little bit different. The requirements are, it must be medically necessary. The individual, again, must be under the supervision of a treating physician. And they must have a need for continuous skilled nursing. As well, they must participate in the development of the plan of care with the treating physician and then the provider coordinating the services. The hours would be a little bit different because it would be based on the assessment. When it's needed, somebody would come to the house and actually make that determination on how many hours are needed. You could have, they could be provided by a Medicare certified home health agency or an independent or non-agency nurse, as long as they're enrolled as an Ohio Medicaid provider. The assessment or the authorization would actually then determine the number of hours. I will say that after a 3-day inpatient hospitalization, a person can receive up to 56 hours a week for 60 consecutive days without authorization. And similar to the home health nursing, the private duty nursing also has to be provided by an RN or an LPN. a lot of the same tasks that would be provided by the other nursing services is what they would be able to come into the home and do. The only thing I would note here is that the hours are greater than 4 hours, but up to 12 hours a day. Is there any questions around that?
Well, you know, it's no secret that in this state, nurses are at a premium. It's just incredible. And I know our families have been, many of our families who have private duty nursing have had that reviewed, and many of them are going to lose that. And of course, folks are worried, does that ultimately mean that a child that families want to keep at home would have to be placed in an out-of-home facility, which just seems crazy on so many levels. But what I wonder is, and I know you have a director now who is incredibly knowledgeable about DD folks, but is there any larger plan to look at the number of nurses? This has gone on for years, and it seems to be getting worse instead of better. People are so worried.
I would tell you that at this point in time, I do know we have new administration, and this is one of the areas that we are going to be looking into a little bit more and reviewing the current policies. So, and that we're very aware of the provider, finding the correct providers and the shortage of nurses, and we are aware of that, so.
And the DD community, well, and I'm from DD Council, and we have funding. Anything that we can do to help, we would be happy to step up, and I know families would be too. I mean, I think there hasn't been the kind of outreach to folks to say, together, this is a problem, how can we fix it, instead of, we're going to review you and take away your nurse, probably. So I know family groups will be willing to help if you can figure out a solution or even start down that path.
Oh, that's good to know. Thank you.
That's not only a shortage just of the nurses, but the independent providers that we're having right now.
We're being told as a family that our independent providers, the rule, the 60-hour week rule, is now being eliminated to 40-hour week. And if we want our independent providers to still be with us, we have to send them to an agency. So that's what we're being told by our county boards. So, I mean, and there's such a shortage, there's not agencies or independent providers out there to help serve these individuals that have the needs for care.
Yes.
You don't live in a rural county.
And as a family, we do. And it's very hard to get people from other counties to come into our counties with the shortage that we have. But when they're telling us as, families that your independent providers cannot work but 40 hours a week to secure them, but the rule says up to 60, that's detrimental to the people who have those relationships with their staff members that need that, and we don't have the security with those staff members a lot of the times because the turnover rate is so high.
Is that through your DOD waiver? That the 60 hours? Okay. So, I mean, as we evaluate this will be something we can definitely take into consideration with, we'll be working with the sister agency.
Just to add to that, it took me four agencies to find somebody that would come out to do some care that was just ordered by our physician for a nursing service 3 days a week.
Wow.
So yeah, it's not you're offering the service, but finding people is difficult.
Right. I do feel like I've heard that quite a bit with the finding the services.
Just secured it about an hour ago.
Is part of this shortage, is this because I'm not familiar with this problem at all? So, yeah, you're right, I'm blessed. But is it because of the wages that they receive when they are doing this? I mean, so many cases when it comes to people with special needs, that's what it comes down to. They're paid so poorly. Is that what the problem is here when getting these nurses to come into the homes?
I really couldn't speak to what causes this shortage. I'm not sure exactly I've heard different things, but I really don't know like the true problem of it, but it's obviously something that needs to be looked into.
Do they get a decent wage?
No. 11
Oh, yeah.
Well, and nursing
Oh, yeah, thank you. Well, I can see what you're saying. That's a problem.
I think with the staff shortage, at least in our experience and people I talk with, is wages, because they're providing the direct care, and, you know, they can go work at McDonald's or Pizza Hut and make the same money and maybe not have as much stress on them, depending on the child they're serving. And I have a son with special needs, and he has behaviors. So I'm all for, I heard recently where they're talking about giving an increase in pay to direct care staff. I think it's like $1 on the hour for if you have an individual that has behaviors. And I'm saying give them more than that, because unless you work with someone who has behaviors, you won't understand. But the other thing is, I've heard that the turnover, there's a lot of turnover because people that come into these jobs, they aren't always educated like they should be as to what their job's going to really involve. I don't know what they're thinking the job's going to be, but once they get into it, they're like, oh my gosh. So, yeah.
So I think one of the things that we need to distinguish is that the presentation right here is about straight Medicaid services. So I think a lot of the conversation that's happening right now is around waiver services, direct care staff in waiver world. So I just want to make sure that we distinguish between those two different things, because we've got Amy that's going to be presenting next on the waiver services. So that might be the more appropriate place for some of these. You know, I heard the $11, I heard the behavior add-on. Those are all waiver kind of questions. So we wanted to bring the folks from Medicaid in to show that there are other services on top of or in addition to the waiver services as well. So that's what they're presenting on right now. So I just wanted to clarify that for folks who are listening.
It's definitely, they supplement each other. So, but it's, we have that same, some of the things I'm hearing are the same things we hear from Medicaid as well. So obviously there is something with that.
Absolutely, and there is a link, and ultimately we need Medicaid to take a look at this. We really do, and as I said, to reach out to start to figure out how can we turn out more nurses. One thing you hear is that universities and whatever keep the level of folks being turned out artificially low so that salaries will stay high. That's what you hear. I don't have any figures, but you know, I'm pretty bitter about this because it just seems like we can do better. We can do better if we work at it.
I'm not familiar today with home health services, but a year and a half ago, my county suddenly decided that my son needed that, and so I went from having an individual provider that I had to ask to go and work for an agency and take a $6.50 cut per hour. So there is that issue. And then the 4 hours that we were given each day for somebody who needs 24/7 care was outrageous. So, and on top of that, at the time, I called Jeff Davis, who was with all the providers, and asked him if he knew anybody in Cuyahoga County that was certified for home health services. There was only one. I signed with them the day they were certified, and since then, they've given it up because there was no money in it. They couldn't afford it. The director was desperate to try and keep it, but his board voted against it. So, you know, I don't know if there are more certified home health service providers even.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, like he was saying earlier, how the waivers services are provided versus this traditional Medicaid. I think the counties work closer with the waivers and how those are provided. So, as far as providers being in the right areas, that's always going to be a tricky thing for the state to manage.
How easy is it for an agency to get certified to provide Medicaid services, like home health services through Medicaid?
To become a Medicare home health provider?
Yes.
Well, there is a provider enrollment process, and there's an application online. I am not the expert on provider enrollment, so I wouldn't be able to. I do know that they would have to meet the conditions of participation as they do for Medicare. So if you're already a you would have to do both for a home health agency.
Okay. Is there somewhere that we could go and find out how to go about that process? I helped an agency, well, I attempted to help an agency who was going to be billing the waivers also become certified to bill for home health, to bill health check for home health hours. And no one could direct us how to do that. Therefore, there's nobody that wants to take on billing for health check or through Medicaid.
How to bill it or how to become a provider?
You have to become a provider before you can bill for it.
Correct. So yeah, I could give you the resources to who you would need to contact to become a Medicaid provider.
You can go on medicaid.ohio.gov underneath providers, and there should be a link underneath the drop down that will show you how you can become, link you in,
You should be able to go to medicaid.ohio.gov and go to the provider link, the tab. It'll have a drop down and it'll let you know there should be an option like want to become a provider or how to become a provider, and it'll give you additional information on how to become or a number that you can contact to get your questions answered. We are not, we do work at Medicaid, we can guarantee you that, but we have different areas that specialize in different things, and we are not that area that you're right at the moment expressing interest in.
And we can get, because there are folks, we do have like a whole provider enrollment area, and I'm sure they would be happy, if that doesn't be an interest here, they'd be happy to come in here and present like how to become an Medicaid provider. And especially if you need like a certain provider type, they could probably walk you through the criteria and what needs to be met and how to do that. So if there's an interest in that, I mean, I'm sure we could arrange to have those folks come in here and help with that.
Okay, and then I have one more question. What is the difference between the Ohio Home Care Program when it comes to home health aides and health check when it comes to home health aides?
So we're going to talk about health check here in a second. We just haven't got that far yet, but that's what Shauna's going to come here and talk. But I don't think it's, and she'll kind of help with that. But what's under the home health aid is what's available for health check as well.
So health check, I'm sorry.
So let me just finish my slide, and then we'll get to that next one. Maybe that will help answer the question. So the only thing I kind of wanted to, I'm going to skip that one, we're going to go to so the only thing I just kind of wanted to point out at the very end is that the slides that I just kind of went through could vary for waivers, which I think we've already addressed. You do get case management with a waiver, and the same kind of with the managed care plans. All of the managed care plans are kind of required to provide those same basic benefits, but but they could have different assessment, and they could also have different authorization regulations, but your home health, the provider themselves would actually be working with the managed care plan or even traditional Medicaid to get those services approved for you. So I'll go ahead and let Shauna come up, and we can kind of try to talk about some of the health check piece of it, because I do think there's some questions around that, and we wanted to make sure we try to provide some clarification.
You see, they want to introduce me. I only give one slide. Okay, so once again, my name is Shauna Trimble. I oversee the county agencies for the informing of health check and the soft services, the liaison between if you need transportation, referrals. That's my bailiwick. However, today, I am here to talk about the exceptions. So health check itself is Medicaid. So when you ask the difference between what's home health and then why you have something that says extended hours, if your child is under 21, you can get health check. It's really one and the same. The difference is the fact that you have a child that's under 21. And because health check caters to children, it's stating that in the state plan, there may be benefits that are hardline for adults, but because you have a child that qualifies for these particular services, they may be able to get them. The word is may, not necessarily a guarantee. They have to meet medical necessity. Now, in your environment, or for this particular presentation, we're talking about your child needs additional hours other than that 14 hours that stops. That's the base. So when your child needs the additional hours, health check, because of their age, may grant them the additional hours if the physician first makes the order that determines the fact that the child needs the additional hours. Then they have to determine the level of care by showing either that the child is in a home and community-based waiver, and if they're not, that Medicaid has determined the level of care and has reviewed it either initially or on an annual basis. Then the third requirement is the fact that the doctor has to determine the need for the home health nursing or the combination of home health, PDN, waiver, and skilled nursing, or skilled therapy, I'm sorry, at least an hour a week or something to that avail. If you meet that criteria, then it has to be assessed in order to make sure that the hours that are being requested are actually needed. That's what health check is in this particular environment. If your child meets the medical necessity needs and the doctor can reinforce and state that it is needed, your child should be able to get those services. Any questions? Any?
So I think the last slide is just questions. If there really aren't any, then that's all we have for you guys today. Thank you. And again, if there's other folks from topics from Medicaid that you would want us to come, I mean, Steve can be in touch with us and we'll be happy to get those folks in the room to provide that information.
Great, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. All right. So we've got a little bit of time before pizza comes. And so the person with the unenviable task of presenting right before lunch, I'll have Loretta give the introduction.
Okay, next we're going to hear from Amy Coey, Waiver Policy Administrator for DODD. And like Steve said, I'm sure no one is envying you at this point.
I have my clicker. So I expected a bigger crowd, but I understand there's quite a few on social media, and is it Facebook that we're broadcasting on, I think, right? Okay, so I'm from the Ohio Department of DD, from the department. The division that I work in is Medicaid Development and Administration. I'm a policy manager there. I primarily work with waiver services, and so the part of the unit that I work with is to develop the services and modify the state plan amendment so we can get services in the plan with the rates that are approved by CMS, and so people can use waivers and get those services. So Steve asked me to come and just say a few words to you guys about some basics about waivers. They're called home and community-based services. So let's talk about home and community-based services. For a state to operate, administer home and community-based services waivers, we have the permission to do that under the Social Security Act under Section 1915C. And it allows us to develop specific criteria, specific plans, specific services, waivers to serve specific people that meet certain criteria. So the funding is provided through the federal government, and it's also, there's a shared part that is non-federal share that is either paid by your local county board or sometimes by the state of Ohio. So to be eligible for a waiver that we operate in the DD system, you have to meet level of care. So I think 2015, July 1 of 2015, this particular level of care, a DD level of care rule went into place. And so we separated it into two categories, birth to 9 years old. And to meet that level of care, you have a substantial delay or specific congenital or acquired condition or other impairment caused that's caused not by a sole mental health diagnosis, right? We know that it can't be a specific mental health diagnosis only. And you also have to require supports, plan supports, because there's a high probability without those supports, SFLs, and at least 3 life areas will occur. So that's 0 to 9, from 10 and over, we have to have a severe chronic disability that's attributable to a mental or physical impairment or a combination of both, that's otherwise not a sole mental health diagnosis. It occurs prior to the age of 22. It's likely to continue indefinitely, and you have to have at least 3 SFLs. And if you know county board services, that's pretty in line with county board eligibility. So in order to enroll someone in a waiver, county boards have to do a few things. They have to abide by the new waiting list rule. And I see some folks in here that helped develop that rule. So we know that people have to be assessed to use a waiting list assessment. And boards have to, prior to enrollment, consider alternative services. So those ladies that were here before, those state plan services, those are alternative services. Part of the state plan includes an ICF benefit, a placement in an ICF. And county board funding. Some county boards use their levy funds to pay for specific services. And there's other community resources that people may use, that I may use, that a person that is aging may use. Council on Aging is big in the county where I reside, and so those are other community supports. We would have to consider all of those things before we would tap into this kind of next level of funding. So the waiting list assessment determines a few things: that you may have an immediate need, and this is a lot of detail in here, and part of the reason why I put this in here is so you have a cheat sheet. So this is directly from rule, and it's a good cheat sheet if you ever want to take a look back at it. So there's an immediate need. An immediate need means that we got to do something within 30 days. It doesn't necessarily mean that the county board's going to give you a waiver and enroll you in a waiver, but it means that we got to probably do something within 30 days. We're either going to meet your need by some alternative service, those things that we just talked about, or maybe we might enroll you in a waiver. And here's the criteria by which we would determine what an immediate need is. You're a resident of an ICF and you received a termination notice. You're a resident of a NIF and we've done an adverse determination. Or that you've received a 30-day intent to discharge from that NIF. The person is an adult and they're losing their caregiver. An adult or a child that engages in documented dangerous behavior that creates a substantial risk. The adult is subject to abuse, neglect, exploitation, or there's impending risk of substantial harm to the caregiver. The person's significant care needs cannot be met. Those are those hands-on, feeding, bathing, lifting, changing, high demand 24 hours. That caregiver can't meet that need anymore. And the person has significant life-threatening medical needs that need to be met. Those are the things that determine immediate need. And you can see how those all would be things that we would need to act on quickly, whether they're alternative resources or whether it might be enrollment in a waiver. A current need means that there's going to have to be something that happens within 12 months. These are the folks that hit the waiting list. These are the folks that wait. So doesn't mean that the board has to enroll them in 12 months, but we probably need to review this, take a look at it, and figure out what we need to do within 12 months. And we may consider enrollment if the board has local match to pay for the enrollment, and depending on what they've projected to do enrollments with. So still some of those same criteria. substantial harm, caregivers declining, chronic condition, that over time we see, you know, within the next year, we know that Aunt Betty cannot continue to take care of John, that we need to do some planning and look for some alternative resources or figure out how maybe we might enroll a person who's next in that list to enroll in the waiver. The person has declining skills. Yes?
If the person that is receiving the waiver is authorized for something that seems that it is not working for the individual, who do I go to or who do I approach?
So the person is enrolled currently on a waiver.
Yes.
Every person that's enrolled in a waiver is required, the county board is required to provide them with a service and support administrator, an SSA. Some counties call them different things. I know that in Richland County they call them ICs. But that service coordinator is the point of coordination for those services. And they also should be taking a look at that plan that's in place and those providers that are providing those services to make sure that things are working. And if they're not, we may need to replan, revise the plan, and those sorts of things. So you're going to want to contact that SSA directly and say, hey, we see an issue where the services maybe are not working out as we intended, and what do we need to do to readjust this plan?
Well, what if after you've been to the SSA and after you've been to other people in the county,
okay,
up to the superintendent's level,
okay,
then what?
So have you followed the county process, the resolution process that's in administrative code?
Yes.
Okay. So is it a denial of a waiver service?
No, but I did see what you just spoke about. And of course, since I'm just seeing this,
okay,
significant risk to caregiver. There is a rule that is currently benefiting a lot of people, but it doesn't apply to everyone.
Okay.
However, it is being applied, I think, to almost everyone, and that's the shared living rule.
Okay.
What happens with something like that if there's significant risk to the caregiver and yet the shared living rule actually the caregiver who's at risk is still the person who must take care of the individual 24/7.
So this rule, what we're talking about here is the waiting list assessment. So this talks about the person being at risk and who we would enroll in services so we eliminate that risk. What you're referring to, I believe, is that a person is already enrolled in the waiver.
Right.
They live with their caregiver.
Right.
The caregiver is at some sort of risk to be harmed. And it sounds to me, and I don't know all the details of the case, but it sounds to me like maybe shared living is not appropriate in that case. And so if I was the SSA, I would assess to say, so what kind of risk are we talking about? Is it that the person maybe has some behavioral health needs that are unmet? Is it that the shared living provider isn't able to perform those tasks that are required to be a provider? Maybe their health is declining and they can no longer be the provider. So we would not need to talk about if I want to continue to live with that person because it's my mom. I'm an adult and that's my mom and I want to continue to live with her, but she just can't be my provider anymore. Who else would I select as a provider? Is there somebody else there in the family that maybe resides in that home that would want to become my provider? And I would stay there and maybe we would just switch providers. Or is it that we would choose somebody else to come into the home to do some drop-in services or maybe some more intensive services? Or would I want to not live there anymore and receive services somewhere else from a different provider? So those are all of the things that maybe a service coordinator and SSA should talk about and do some team planning to figure out what is best for that person and can that provider provide the services that they're required to.
What's the next step after that's all been discussed and documented?
So, I mean, a provider can give notice that they can no longer provide services? Is it the provider can no longer provide, or the person doesn't want to receive those services?
What if the provider is perfectly capable of providing, just not 24/7?
You need to have a discussion about whether those are shared living services or not. And it's sometimes when we can't resolve things locally, sometimes an MDA will intervene and have a conversation. And the unit that I work in, and I'm gonna point to Steve, sometimes Steve and I work together. So I have a Medicaid perspective, he has a family advocacy perspective, and so sometimes we'll work together with families and county boards and say, maybe see it this way, and maybe consider this, and maybe sometimes there's a misinterpretation of rules, and maybe we need some support to do those sorts of things. So maybe we could have a conversation after this, and
okay,
we could help out a little if we can.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Sure. So those are the two. This current need, remember, that's how you land on the waiting list. And there's the criteria in detail about why we would land on the waiting list. So it would be expected that if we know that people have needs that could be met within the next 12 months, not a guarantee of waiver enrollment, because there's some factors in there, but probably going to need some services. So we boards want those folks on their radar. So in order to complete enrollment, boards use a web-based application that is owned and operated by the Department of DD, and we allocate a number of waivers, and boards follow their waiting list and do enrollments. After those are approved, the board can complete the level of care and we can get people enrolled. Free choice of provider. So anyone that's enrolled in a Medicaid waiver has the right to a free choice of provider. And sometimes people get this a little skewed. So sometimes people want a specific service, but we know that we have to authorize services based on medical necessity. So even though I may want nursing, right? That seems to be the big one now. I may want nursing, but really the service that's appropriate that the board can authorize is homemaker personal care. I would choose from willing, available homemaker personal care providers. So that applies to the services that are offered within the waiver. The provider you choose has to have a Medicaid agreement. They have to be certified by the Ohio Department of DD. And they, of course, have to meet the criteria of a provider and be willing and able to do that. If you want to search for a provider, there's a search tool on our website that you can access. And I think we're getting closer to the date that we're going to launch the new website, which will have a modified search on there for providers.
When you have free choice of providers, and when your county boards are telling you you have to, you want your independent provider to follow the 60-hour rule, and that individual wants that independent provider to be their provider services, but your county boards are telling you, no, they're only allowed in 40 hours a week, and the rest of them have to go to agency. But you're requesting as the individual to have that free
That's a good
choice.
example. So that's a good example about, even though you have free choice of provider, we also have to follow those other rules. And we know that overtime is a rule that we have to follow. So just because I want Steve to be my provider and I need 120 hours of service a week, doesn't mean that I can say I only choose Steve to provide those services. So in overtime, we know that there's some things that make it permissible to authorize over. And so those would all have to be considered, but just because I say I want Steve to be, doesn't necessarily, that's not what free choice of provider means. We still have to abide by all of those other standards.
As long as you don't go over 60 hours as a provider, independent.
As long as it's authorized to go up to 60.
Correct. For those situations.
Yes. Sure.
I do have a question about that, though. if you are a family caregiver, is it even necessary to be paid overtime?
So
according to the law?
Are you talking about shared living?
No, I'm talking about the 60-hour rule.
The shared living rule applies to any independent provider, whether it's HPC or nursing. So whether you're related or not, if you're an independent provider of HPC or nursing, waiver of nursing, it's applicable.
You're asking if
I'm asking about
you're paid overtime versus the base rate that Medicaid pays versus
exactly.
Because we were told that most people don't bill for the overtime, which is kind of against the fair labor laws. If you're an independent provider, because once after 40 hits, anything after 40 is considered overtime, and that's where the cost difference comes into play.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that if I am a provider for my family member and I should be authorized a certain number of hours in an ISP. So a provider would never just decide how many hours they're going to provide. That would be planned for and cost projected and authorized by a county board, right? So they're the administrator, they're the local Medicaid authority, and they administer these waivers. So they're responsible to make sure that whoever is authorized on that plan provides those services and as described in the plan. So in the event that we have a provider that says, you know, I work for my adult son and he resides in a different residence and I provide 38 hours of service a week, but what I really provide is 62, we probably should be having a conversation at the county board with the SSA to say, so are these natural supports? Are these natural supports that you're providing? Or is there really a need for an authorization of overtime, or is there an additional provider that's needed?
Yes, I was wondering though, since there seems to be a provision, I'm not exactly sure what it was, but that if you are a family caregiver, that you don't need to be paid overtime. And so that figure that you mentioned earlier, say 120 hours, if you work the whole 120 hours, what's the difference? I mean, if you're working it, taking care of your family member, it's not costing the state anymore, and it's not necessarily breaking the rule.
So I'm not sure that I understand the question. So are you saying
why should the 60-hour rule apply to family members when they don't have to be paid overtime?
I'm not certain I understand that question. That's not reflected in the rule.
Yeah, that's not reflected in the rule. Regardless of who's providing the services, my understanding is that person gets the additional after 40 hours.
Right. I understood that you can work up to 60
right.
and not get paid overtime. My understanding is you could work up to 60 hours, I believe, whether family or not family. Over 60 you had to get it pre-approved.
You have to have overtime approved in general, and there's criteria that you would go, that you can meet to provide over 40 hours a week. Those are all specified in rule, and I'm not the expert on the overtime rule.
No, I agree with that, but I'm saying between 40 and 60, I've been told that you don't have to bill overtime.
I'm not certain about that. So I don't think there's any difference between family, non-family.
Right. I agree with that.
The rule is the rule. So a provider may choose not to bill overtime, but if a plan is authorized and includes 60 hours, there's an overtime issue clearly there.
Right, but if it's not in the ISP, it's not, they choose not to bill those 20 hours at overtime.
That would I would assume that that's considered natural support, and natural support would be captured on the.
If an independent provider comes into someone's home, works 60 hours and chooses not to bill overtime from 40 to 60.
No,
Is
I
that
mean, we
permitted?
need, so certified
That's what I'm
providers with a Medicaid agreement have to follow what the ISP says, and I'm not certain why we would only put 40 hours on an ISP and assume that a paid provider would just do a gimme of 20 hours. So I'm not certain.
I'm not saying giving. They're still getting paid.
They're just not billing.
They're not billing overtime.
I mean, they should
They
be.
should be.
So between 40 and 60 hours, they should be billing their overtime.
But do they have
rate.
to?
Yes. And that
Yeah.
has to be authorized.
Right.
And it,
For family member or not.
yeah.
Yeah, that's worked hours,
That's
and
worked
so
hours.
between
Yes.
the 40 and the 60 is overtime hours. Yeah, and I think where the confusion might be is between this independent provider, 40 and 60 hours, and the shared living, which is a family member living with
Right,
somebody
right.
in their own home on an IO waiver, because then that is considered shared living at a daily rate, not an hourly rate. And so that might be a little bit where the confusion might be lying in some of this conversation.
Sure. If we have specific case things, we can talk to you about those after the presentation and maybe find somebody that can answer the specifics. So home and community-based services waivers, here's a few things that they don't pay for. They don't pay directly to the person that's enrolled or their guardian. They don't pay for guardianship services. They don't pay for room and board unless it's associated somehow with respite. And they do pay for a limited number of home delivered meals. They pay for institutional services only if they're respite. They don't pay for services otherwise available under Medicaid state plan services. So if there's a service available, especially we see that talked about health check with children, we wouldn't automatically authorize waiver services if we haven't used Medicaid state plan services. The waivers don't pay for things that are otherwise available under vocational rehabilitation or through special education. So some of those things that are captured in IEPs or vocational services, maybe through OOD, we wouldn't authorize those under the waiver unless those we could use these services first. It doesn't pay for general home repair. We get this question a lot. Modifications. So sometimes I hear somebody. Oh, okay. I was like, where did that come from? So general home repair, the question that we get is that somebody might need a adaptation to a shower or a toilet. But sometimes we'll say, we'll get a request that people say, let's just gut this bathroom and we'll put a new bathroom in. So it's not about that. It's not general use. It really indeed is adaptations and modifications. And there's funds in the waiver to pay for those things, just not of general utility. Sometimes we get requests for washing machines, to remodel kitchens, to buy stoves, those sorts of things. Those are considered general utility. So, we have to be careful with those things. Service and support administration, I kind of already talked about a little bit. Your SSA, if you're enrolled in a waiver, you have an SSA. That's your go-to. That's your central point of, what do we call them? The primary point of coordination. We used to call them something different. So they assess a person for a need. They develop a service plan. They develop the budgets. They can help with provider selection and to make sure that free choice of provider is implemented. Some people just say, give me a list of providers that are available to do homemaker personal care in this county. Other people need some hands-on support to say, how does this website work? And SSA should be impartial, but we can give facts to people. We can say, 28 people in our county use agency ABC, and we can tell them who's available in our county. So they can help with that provider selection. They just can't make the provider selection or steer people towards specific providers. They're there to coordinate all services, not just waiver services, any service that person needs, whether it's state plan, any alternative services, and capture those in a plan and to make sure that they monitor that plan. So we come back and say, is this plan working? Are these services working? What's not working, and what do we need to revise? All the services that are reimbursed through the waiver have to be identified in the plan. We have to make sure that there's a description of those in the plan. We have to make sure that it's a team process with the person at the center. We wouldn't apply the same services to Steve's life as we would apply to my life. So we have to make sure that those are person-centered. The team has to include the person and their representative or guardian, the SSA for sure. Sometimes we want some providers there, sometimes we don't want other providers there, but all providers need copies of the plan prior to implementation, and they need to have an understanding of that plan so they can get it implemented. The ISPs have to include not just waiver services, but all the other services too. So if you get intermittent nursing, state plan nursing, we need that captured in the ISP. If you receive private duty nursing, that's a state plan service. We have to capture that in the plan. All ISPs shall, and you guys probably know when we say shall, it's written somewhere in a rule that means you have to. It shall be done. Assist the individual to engage in community activities and to develop some contacts. So whatever those services are, they're required to meet those needs. All ISPs have to indicate the provider, the frequency, how we're going to pay for it, or how it's otherwise funded. Maybe it's not paid for. Maybe it's mom doing some natural supports that she wants to do. And it has to be updated at least, once annually. So we know that some people, the plan's just not right. We authorize it and we got to come back to the table every 45 days. But at least it has to be at a minimum of every year that we authorize it. I'm trying to watch the clock. How much time? DODD, we operate 3 waivers. The IO, the level 1, and the South. These numbers are reflective of maybe a year ago. We might have a few more in there. Should be close to 34, 35,000, maybe kind of tipping towards 36. IO is known as that comprehensive waiver. It's the larger budget. Level 1 is kind of the mini-me of that. It's got some very similar services in there, but a smaller budget related to HPC and respite. And SELF is that participant directed waiver. We developed it specifically for that. So here's a list of the waiver services. I'm not going to go through all of them, but this is basically a cheat sheet for you guys to see what that service package looks like. To develop the budget for the IO waiver, there's a standardized assessment that we have to do. It's the DDP. You fall within a range, and people that meet these certain criteria within the range should, when we go to project the amount of services, it should look similar. It should hit somewhere in that range. The IO waiver has a prior authorization available in it. So even though I do the DDP and I fall within a range, I might require some additional services that go over my range. And so county boards submit those prior authorizations to the department, and we review those and make sure that the need for those services are medically necessary, and then we allow them to authorize some additional money. The DDP allows for statewide-ness to say that everybody enrolled in this waiver based on these criteria that fall in these ranges typically receive this amount of service. But we also know that there's some exceptions, and that's the prior authorization process. There's 9 ranges. Each county board has a cost of doing business category. There's 8 of those, because we know that finances look different, income looks different across different counties. So the DDP applies to everything except anything in the adult array package and non-medical transportation. They have their own budget. Those are those non-residential supports, adult day, vocab, career planning, individual and group employment. They're not part of the DDP. We figure out how much we can spend on those based on the AAI. I think she has a question.
My son, in his ISP, it states that he requires 24/7 care.
Okay.
But using the DOD, I'm sorry, the ODDP,
Okay.
it does not ask anything in regards to medical care.
Okay. I think it does have a section for diagnoses.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But it does not, when you put it in the computer and you answer the questions,
Sure.
it spits him out at $19,000.
And does
So
he
how do
reside
you-
with
yeah.
you?
Pardon?
Does he reside with you?
Yes.
He's an adult, he
So
resides?
the county has decided that I'm volunteering my services,
No.
but I can't work because somebody has to be with him.
There's no requirement that a parent of an adult child to provide care for their adult children. So we cannot say to a parent, just because he's your child, he's an adult child, you're required to provide the care. That looks different when they're a minor, right? Because we parent and we're required to parent. But there's no requirement for an adult, the parent of an adult, to provide care unless they want to. There's natural support. CMS has guidance on that says, no, you can't do that. If you want to, you certainly can. We should capture it in the ISP. If you don't want to, and you can't meet that need, there's also no requirement for your son to move out of your residence. He can continue to receive some. Maybe you want to do 4 hours a week. Maybe you want to just be there. He needs 24-hour care. We're there overnight. He doesn't get up. Maybe that's what you want to, because you don't want somebody in your house. But that's a conversation with the board and planning, but we should not be saying to parents, you have to provide care, natural supports when you do not want to.
Would you like to write a letter to Cuyahoga County to work that out? Because I am constantly, my son has just lost transportation to work, and now I'm volunteering transporting him 52 miles a day.
Hey, Steve, can we have a conversation after this?
Please.
Steve will put you on the list, we'll have a conversation. So, day services, non-medical transportation, acuity assessment is like DDP in that it's standardized. It basically assigns a group based on ratios, and that's the reimbursement. There is a process that if you hit that A1, B group, that we can do what's similar to a prior authorization and say, but really, the services would look more like C, where the provider is maybe providing some more intensive services. The board submits something to the department, we review it, and so it looks very similar to prior authorization. Here's the service package for level 1. Carolyn, I think you're on the waiver work group, so you probably know this too. We worked really hard to make services within the waivers look very similar in the event that this administration wants to continue and make a waiver. So it's easy for a board to assess, and then authorize the services that meet the need. And that was part of the waiting list work too. The budget limitations, 5325. So that's the difference. In DDP, you have those ranges. Level 1 hits that 5325. There's some other funding inside of that waiver. The 7,500 over 3 years for emergency specialized equipment. Assistive tech now falls into this. And the 8520 is the emergency over 3 years. And that gives us a little bit of time to do some extra planning and to figure out, do we need a different waiver package to get this person rolled over. It requires a pre-screen because it's limited funding to make sure a person's needs really can be met by that level 1. SELF is the participant directed. When we modified The self-waiver, we built a component of participant direction into all of the waivers. So we have participant-directed homemaker personal care, where a person can employ their own staff. They can have a little bit of employer authority, an ION level 1. But this, you'll see the bolded services, those are distinct to self. The other services cross over into the other waivers. A support broker, sometimes people get this really confused with an SSA. A support broker, you don't have to have one to be enrolled in a self-waiver. Some people need it, some people pay them, sometimes they're unpaid. They provide representation and advocacy to the person. When I can't advocate for myself and decide how much I want to pay my staff, maybe my support broker can negotiate that with the staff. They help negotiate rates. They help select providers, because we know this is a provider function. Those are never county board SSA functions. The limitation is $8,000 that a support broker could access. We could access that service for. It can't be somebody from the county board. It can't be county board employees. It can't be self-waiver providers. So if I'm going to provide services for John Smith and be his homemaker personal care staff, I can't also be the person that negotiates the rate and represents him. The following cannot be paid support brokers. Those are guardians and family members who live with the individual. Participant-directed goods and services, we modified the rule this past year and gave some very distinct guidance. So this is a pot of money to buy goods and services that are not otherwise available through other sources and are not defined in rule somewhere. So maybe to buy some equipment, to do a modification, to do things like that. Sometimes we pay for memberships. The outcome ultimately has to be to decrease the need on other Medicaid services, to promote inclusion, and help maintain the safety in the home environment. Self-waivers, still the cap remains the same, $40,000 for adults and $25,000 for children. Sometimes, people maintain the $25,000 through the age 22. Some people graduate at 18 and are considered adults and move on and use some employment services, so we want to move them onto that adult budget. This should have been pulled from the presentation. Those services are not correct, but some of those limitations are, so you could just go ahead and ignore that one. Self does require a pre-screen. We have to say that a person can self-direct, they can do the participant direction, or that they have somebody that can help them do that. They have to be able to either do budget authority or employer authority, or have somebody that can help them do those things. So that's a big component of the self-waiver. Did I make that? Okay. All right.
Questions for Amy?
Sure. Come.
For the support broker,
yeah, let me go back.
So there's a place on the DODD website where you can do and become a support broker. But when you talk to like Delaware County, they say that you have to become a provider as well. Is that right?
I don't think that we've made a requirement to be a provider if you're not going to be paid for it.
But if you're going to be paid for it, then you do have to be a provider.
You do have to be a paid provider, because that's your Medicaid, or you're going to bill Medicaid for that service. So but if you're just going to be an unpaid provider and listed in the ISP, you're required to take the class.
Right.
Have that little piece of paper that says you're certified. But you don't have, and you make yourself known to us, and the board puts you in the ISP. That way.
Okay.
Yep. We see a lot of family members decide to do that for their adult children, but are not paid because they don't want it to come out of the budget.
And is there any provision if you're a guardian? that you still can be a provider for your adult child.
I think there's ways that you can be a guardian for your adult child, but I think where it's, I don't know that it's, I don't want to.
It's not prohibited, but you do have to get special consideration
From your probate, yeah.
From the probate court,
yeah.
right?
So they have specific guidelines, they're the ultimate guardian.
Yeah.
They have specific criteria and questions that they'll ask, make sure that you're acting in the best interest and all those type of things. So as long as things are good with the probate court, the child is over the age of 18,
Yeah.
then it is possible, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Question from Facebook. If a person can't find an agency or provider to accept their case, what do they do next?
So the person should contact their SSA and figure out what the next steps are to find a provider. So the SSA may have to help them look at different counties, who else is available. We may have to develop some providers, but always return to that SSA, to that county board, and see where we can get some support to find an appropriate provider.
Sometimes that can be self-recruitment too,
Sure.
right? Like if you have somebody in your life that you know does well with your son or daughter, knows them inside and out, then the SSA or yourself can help that person either walk through the process of becoming an independent provider, hooking up with an agency. I mean, most of the folks in our system that provide care for folks are connected to them in one way or another. And so if you have somebody in mind that can do that, then help walk them through those steps. That's going to be the best care that you're going to get, somebody that already knows your son and daughter and can provide that care on that level.
Okay.
What do you think the take-up on the smaller waiver, not the level 1, self. Why do you think the take-up on that, because that's been around for years now, and what, not even 2000? Why do you think the take-up's been so slow on that? I mean, I know you're sort of speculating.
Yeah, so I think, in the beginning, it was very limited to the folks that could get it, right? When it first rolled out, it was just a few per county. People developed specialized SSAs who only did self-waiver services. That SSA may have moved on to a different place, and the knowledge of the services provided in that waiver may have left with that SSA. And so I think there's a lot of reasons why. Personally, I think it's the most flexible and amazing waiver for folks who need a little bit of support to be more independent. It really does provide them with a lot of services and flexibility to do that. It's just a matter of understanding it, understanding the services in it, understanding the purposes of the services, and then being able to utilize those in a flexible way to support somebody to be as independent as they can be. So I think it does take a little bit of extra education just because a self-directed waiver is different. It has different terminology than some of the other waivers. But I think we're getting to the point where that terminology is becoming more commonplace and maybe a little bit more easier to understand for folks. So I think the more and more we talk about it, the more and more examples we give of how it can be used, I think the more beneficial it will be and maybe more people will be interested.
We also, when SELF was initiated in 2012, it had a kind of homemaker personal care-esque service in there that was community inclusion, and it was personal attendant and then transportation, and the rate was very different than HPC. And so last year we changed it to participant directed HPC. It mirrors HPC with a participant direction component to it, and it has the same rate as that independent provider structure. So it was looking at what, $11, and independent is $17.96. So we changed that rate significantly, and we also added some state funded waivers to kind of promote that waiver. So we see more use of it than we did, but still.
And Marge and I were talking, we wonder if folks don't want to take that, thinking that they really like an IO waiver, and if they take that one, they're precluded from the IO waiver. And I bet some people do think
Yeah,
that.
and that could definitely be a myth that's out there, but it is, especially with the new waiting list assessment, It should all be based on need, regardless if you have a waiver or don't have a waiver. If the waiver is not meeting your needs, then you should be looking at what the next steps are, what other resources. Is it the next waiver? Is it an IO? Is it some other services to supplement the cell for the level 1? It really needs to be looked at from a needs perspective and not necessarily a be-all, end-all type of thing.
Yes, and during the waiting list development, a brochure was developed, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen it with 4 cases on it. And council, we said we'd pay for that to help, and Steve was part of this. So we put out $50,000, and that was in September, and they got mailed out that afternoon. Day before yesterday, I just got an email from the County Board Association saying, you know what? All those brochures are gone. And people are I'm just stunned. People are asking if they could have, if they could have more, and we were wondering if you'd help us again. 50,000 in there, gone. So, boy, yeah. So, but, wow.
So nobody probably wants to be the last question before lunch, do they? No? Okay, thanks, Amy, for your time. Really appreciate it. So just real quick, before we break for lunch, reminder to complete your feedback forms that are in your packets. Please complete those. We'll put them on the tables over here where you signed in at. That really helps us structure these so we know what's working, what's not working, what topics do you want to hear. The feedback forms are our way to know that from you. So please turn those in. The rest of the day looks like we're going to do lunch. We're going to do the table conversation. So we packed a lot of information in this morning. We're going to take some time to digest that information, think about it, and think about it in context of what can we do to better help families understand all of this. What can help, what currently gets in the way of that. So kind of be mulling that over a little bit. Director Davis is planning on being here with us, so we'll have the opportunity to report that feedback directly to him. And then we have Barb's going to present some Charting the Life course tools and framework around financial planning and these type of things. So I want to say goodbye to all the DODD watch parties that are out there. Thank you for watching this morning. Hopefully you're connecting with other families in your area right now, and you can continue this conversation. What's going on in your area? What type of resources do you have? What is your county board providing in these different areas, and where can we do better in them? So please continue to meet, connect with each other, and network through those. Beyond that, lunch is in the back. Enjoy. We will reconvene about 1 o'clock. Thanks, everybody.